I would like to introduce you to our final speaker of the day, Mr. Emmanuel Tissera, a newly minted Umbraco MVP. Emmanuel has been working with Umbraco since 2009. He's the technical director at Luminary Digital in Melbourne, Australia. Emmanuel organizes the Umbraco Melbourne meetups and also speaks at various developer conferences on CMS-related topics. If you could, everyone, please help me to welcome all the way from Australia. Good morning, Emmanuel. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Kyle. Good morning once again from Australia. And thank you for attending this talk about building static sites in .NET 5 with Umbraco Heartcore. Are static sites and static web pages taking us back to the dark ages? This is the world's first web page. It was a static HTML file handcrafted by the inventor of the World Wide Web almost 30 years ago. Fast forward to 2021, and we are still talking about static HTML files such as this one. In this talk, I will try to shed light as to why it seems we're going back in time. I'm Emmanuel Tissera. I've been in software and web development for over 18 years now. For the last 6 years, I've been working with Luminary. I worked with clients like Schneider Electric, Save the Children, and UNICEF. It's been one hell of a ride, and I'm loving it. I've been working with headless CMSs since 2016 and talking about it every chance I get. I've even got Big Bird to assist on occasion. Talking about static sites can be a bit bland, so I'm going to add a bit of sweetness to our agenda. We will talk about JAMStack and its benefits. Then we will talk about JAMStack heartaches and the landscape of static site generators, how Umbraco Heartcore ties in with static sites, the options available to build a static site in .NET 5, a demo of some work I have done to solve those heartaches, and finally, some Q&A if we have time. JAMStack is a term coined by Matt Bielman, the co-founder of Netlify. What does JAMStack stand for? JavaScript, APIs or application programming interfaces, and markup. We will delve into these JAMStack layers next. JavaScript is used to handle any dynamic functionality on the client side. Typically, calls to retrieve data and user interactions are handled by this layer. There's no restriction on which framework or library you must use. You can use React, Angular, Vue, or plain old vanilla JavaScript. When it comes to the API layer, server-side operations are abstracted into reusable APIs. The JavaScript which we discussed in the first layer calls these API endpoints via HTTPS. These APIs can be third-party services or custom functions written by your team. The M in the JAM stands for markup. Websites are served as static HTML files, much like the one which Sir Tim Berners-Lee wrote 30 years ago. These static files can be generated from source files, such as Markdown, used in a static site generator, or they can be generated using content from a headless CMS like Umbraco Heartcore. Typically, these static HTML files, along with the CSS and JavaScript files, are delivered via a content delivery network. In a nutshell, that's what JAMStack means. There are another 3 terms you need to be familiar with when talking about JAMStack. CSR stands for client-side rendering. This is when the client browser requests content via an API request before displaying it to the user. Dynamic SSR or dynamic server-side render usually refers to the process where markup is generated at request time rather than at build time. Whereas with static server-side rendering, the markup is generated at build time rather than at request time. Some folks use SSR as a catch-all phrase, so make sure you clarify which SSR they are referring to. We have looked into what JAMStack is. Now we will explore the benefits of JAMStack. Adam Griffith, the managing director at Luminary, has summarized this beautifully into 6 S's, and I will try to do it justice here. Serving pre-built markup and assets over CDN make JAMStack websites super fast. This also allows these sites to be SEO friendly and will improve conversion rates. JAMStack also brings with it a streamlined development process. This allows for an improved speed to market. Plug in a headless CMS to the mix, and you can see content creation happen even before front-end development has started. With JAMStack, as there are less moving parts and less points of failure, there are no random downtimes. Legacy applications or even database failures don't cause downtime for the end user. As a static HTML is served at the edge, powerful and redundant CDN infrastructure allow for greater stability of your website. Fidget spinners, have you played with one of these recently? Just imagine building a website for a new type of fidget spinner. Now, what happens if that product goes viral and you need to scale your website? With a JAMStack website, this scaling is unbeatable. You don't need to increase web application servers or database servers. The CDN seamlessly compensates as you serve a growing number of active users. This brings in significant cost savings as you scale. If you add a database server, your operating expenditure goes up. But when scaling a JAMStack site, your operating costs are significantly lower. Read-only static HTML files on the CDN have no connection to a web server or a database server. So no servers to secure and no servers to be attacked. You need not worry about server or database vulnerabilities. With JAMStack, dynamic server-side functionality is provided by microservices. With microservices, the attack surface is reduced. Dynamic tools and services can be provided by vendors with teams dedicated to securing their specific systems and providing high levels of service and security. Serviceability refers to the quality of the experience in designing, building, and maintaining JAMStack-driven web experiences. The maker experience for designers, developers, content authors, and digital marketers is a critical success factor in the ongoing success of any website or application. JAMStack sites do not depend on proprietary technology or exotic and little-known frameworks. Instead, they build on widely available tools, modern best practice methods, and conventions. Have you ever needed to figure out the way a car engine works in order to drive your car? I guess not. Similarly, JAMStack is all about abstracting complexity to deliver ease of use for all stakeholders. The tooling and product ecosystem around JAMStack is making that a reality now. Best of all, for end users, JAMStack brings a simple, blazingly fast experience on your website. To reiterate those 6 S's of benefits which JAMStack brings to businesses: speed, stability, scalability, security, serviceability, and simplicity. Those benefits sound way too good. So, are there any cons when using JAMStack? Let's find out about the heartaches when using JAMStack. Developers are first-class citizens in the JAMStack world. The JAMStack ecosystem is developer-centric. Content authors have to follow ways of working set up by a developer. The website is code-heavy. That's especially true on the front end, where you need to know React, Vue, or Liquid to make changes. This means that content authors don't have the flexibility they had with a traditional CMS-driven website. They need a developer to make even minute changes. A site builder allows a content author to have a drag and drop experience. Echoing our last heartache, a content editor needs a developer to make any page layout changes, even when content is driven by headless CMS. If enough care is not taken during initial development, even a simple reordering of content items would require a code change. If the web page does not use static SSR or static server-side rendering and relies on CSR or client-side rendering, search engine bots will have trouble with them. Even the Google bot, which does a good job of indexing React apps and other JavaScript-driven content, has to index a CSR page in 2 parsers to gather all the SEO information. With other search engines such as Bing, Yahoo, and DuckDuckGo, it's a mystery as to how this works. Have you tried sharing a client-side rendered page on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook? If you did, most probably the open graph sharing tags for title, description, and image would not have come through. So you need to make sure that static server-side rendering is used to keep the bots happy. As content authors populate new content, this would trigger a site build. This could take a few minutes to a few hours, depending on what was changed and how many pages needed to be rebuilt and deployed. This takes away real-time updates for static sites. Content authors on traditional CMSs such as Umbraco are used to see draft content in a preview mode. This has not been possible in the past with JAMStack sites, but Gatsby Cloud and Next.js preview mode is slowly bridging this gap. Most of our DevOps operations happens on the cloud with continuous building of static sites due to content changes. It could either clog up your build pipelines or exhaust all your build minutes. The biggest heartache or headache for new JAMStack practitioners is a mindset shift. Submitting forms, sending emails, login errors, a simple task in a traditional monolithic CMS. But with JAMStack, you need to reimagine all of this as simple API actions and endpoints. With all the pros of JAMStack, there are cons, as we have seen. We may not be able to fix all these heartaches, but let's see how Umbraco Heartcore helps us out on some. Before we get into Heartcore, let's have a quick look at the static site generators available today. There are over 300 static site generators listed on jamstack.org. But if you look at the most popular static site generators, such as Gatsby, Next.js, Eleventy, Hugo, Jekyll, and Nuxt, you will see something in common. They are based on non.NET languages like JavaScript, Go, and Ruby. The templating language or frameworks in use are React, Go, Liquid, Vue, Handlebars, and such. These static site generators don't use a template markup syntax like ASP.NET Razor. Are we Microsoft fanboys and fangirls here in the Umbraco community? Or are we just passionate about our craft? I'll let you decide. So I looked around for .NET static site generators offering Razor templating support and came across these 5 generators on JAMStack.org. We've spoken about JAMStack, what it means, the benefits, and heartaches. We've also talked about static site generators and particularly .NET ones. So how does all of this tie in with Umbraco Heartcore? For those who are unfamiliar with Umbraco Heartcore, here is a quick primer. Umbraco Heartcore is a SaaS headless CMS offering from Umbraco HQ. It uses the same familiar editing interface you find in Umbraco CMS, which will put content editors at ease immediately. Heartcore delivers content and images via CDN, ensuring fast response times. It's API driven with both REST and GraphQL APIs out of the box. Best of all, because it is available as an API natively, you're free to choose your own technology to build your website or app. If the technology, platform, and infrastructure are not mandated by Umbraco Heartcore, can I build a JAMStack site powered by Heartcore? Then it begs a question. If I've already got a fast CDN for content and images, do I need a static site? With a typical ASP.NET website, server-side rendering happens dynamically at request time. Efficient caching strategies would make the site respond faster on subsequent requests. But that first request will incur a penalty of going to the API source and retrieving the content. Subsequent requests will still incur a penalty when rendering content. When you compare that with a site which is server-side rendered at build time, the static HTML file can be served immediately without any calls to an API. Best of all, this static HTML file can be distributed via a CDN. So with this performance and other JAMStack benefits we talked about earlier, let's look at our options. As soon as you want to build a static site, you're faced with a bunch of awesome static site generators with template in JavaScript, React, and Vue. What if you have spent the last 18 years working on .NET? Is there a .NET 5 static site generator? I've had a squiz through some .NET static site generators and sample implementations. Maybe it's my ignorance or the lack of good documentation, but here's what I found. The only static site generator on the market which can integrate headless content seems to be static. I've heard good things about static, so do give it a go. While static seemed like a good choice, I wanted to address those heartaches we talked about earlier. I wanted to give content authors a good experience, allow for dynamic layouts, make sure that our pages were friendly to SEO and social bots. Most of all, I wanted to make sure we had fast builds. Of course, with the mindset shift, I couldn't do much about this, as we do need an open mind as we explore our options here. This is how the idea to build Stazor Pages came to be. I don't claim that Stazor Pages is a purely static site generator, nor is it a dynamic website. It's more of a hybrid model which gives you the best of both worlds. It puts C# and Razor in the driving seat again. In its simplest form, Stazor Pages generates static HTML files on the first request, serves those static pages on subsequent request, and deletes the same file on a webhook call. Let's have a quick look at how this works. The middleware receives the first request for a page. In our case here, the browser is requesting the home page. The middleware then picks up this action and makes a request for dynamic server-side rendering using the home page controller and a Razor file. The controller in turn calls Umbraco Heartcore API to retrieve the content. This response is then captured by the middleware and saved to a static HTML file, index.html in this case. Then the middleware sends a response back to the browser. This completes the life cycle for the first request for a given unique URL. At this point, if a second user requests the same page, the middleware will once again kick in to handle those subsequent requests. The middleware will serve the static file to the user. As you can see, there are no calls to Umbraco Heartcore to retrieve content, nor any runtime code executed to render the page. Now, the editor decides to make a content change. So they go into Umbraco Heartcore, edit, and publish the content. This in turn triggers a webhook call, which hits the Stazor middleware on a special URL. The middleware then deletes that static page. Now the application goes back into a state where it waits for the first request for that page to repeat the steps we saw before. Here's a complete diagram of what is taking place when the Stazor middleware runs. I'll give you a few seconds to digest it again. That's the theoretical part of how Stazor Pages work. Let's jump into a demo. In this demo, I will integrate Stazor Pages to a Umbraco Heartcore powered website, or in reality, a few pages of a website. I'll first log into Umbraco Heartcore, then jump into the settings section where I've created a document type of cafe. It has the usual fields to specify an address. If I jump back into the content section, you can see that I have created a few cafe content items here. This one is for the Melbourne Cafe. I will next create a new project with Visual Studio 2019. For this demo, I'm using version 16.9.2. I will create a new ASP.NET web application, model view controller. I'll give it a name and we'll select a target framework of .NET 5.0. Once the project is created, I will add two NuGet packages. Search for Stazor Pages, make sure that include pre-release is ticked. I'll install the latest version of Stazor Pages. Ditto for Stazor Pages.Heartcore. Once you're done, you should see these two NuGet packages installed for your project. Next, I'm modifying the appsettings.config file to add configuration to point to my Umbraco Heartcore project. Give the project alias there. I'm going to add a class file for the cafe model which we created and which will inherit from Heartcore page and I retrieve content. I will paste in some code here and fix up the references. The only special treatment to this plain old C# class is that I'm binding it to a route data model binder, which allows a Stazor middleware to bind any content from Umbraco Heartcore. Then I will create a controller. The cafe controller. Again, no special code here. I just passed that cafe model, which we created, into the index method, and then in turn to the view. After that, I will create a racer view for the cafe. Let's call it index.html as we usually do. And I have copied in some racer syntax here using that strongly typed cafe model. Now I will add a type resolver. This type resolver needs to implement an iType resolver interface. In here, you can see the code I copied in just only supports the type content for the cafe model. You could expand this to support all content models you've generated. Then jumping into the startup.cs file, we will create a class level variable to access the iWebhost environment. Then in configure services, I will add a reference to the Umbraco config, which we put in earlier in the app settings.config. And now we make a call to add Stazor Pages Heartcore, passing in that web host environment, the Umbraco config, and the type resolver. And then in configure, we will add to use Stazor Pages or Stazor Pages in development, along with mapping endpoints to controllers and Stazor Pages. Now, because we have not mapped all the content types, this application is going to throw an error if you have accessed the website root. So I am adding a launch URL for Melbourne CBD. Then let's run this project. And it will load up the content from Umbraco Heartcore. And if we switch to the Sydney Cafe, we can see that coming through as well. If you look at the file system, you will see the static pages created in the app_data folder, and these two HTML files correspond to the URLs we requested. And if you open the text file or the HTML file, you will see the static HTML within it. If you jump into the Umbraco Heartcore back office, you can set up a webhook to delete the static page on publish, unpublish, and delete events, as I've done here. Stazor Pages is still in its infancy. I'd like to dogfood the concept on my wife's website and see it grow. The code is available on GitHub via bit.ly/Stazor Pages. Your ideas and code contributions are more than welcome. Static HTML pages may have come the full circle from being handcrafted by Sir Tim Berners-Lee 30 years ago to being auto-generated on a content editor's actions today. With a headless CMS like Umbraco Heartcore in the mix, static sites are the future. The caveat is that it's best suited for certain use cases and business requirements. Adding a .NET static site generator and it is a sure win for those die-hard Microsoft fans. Thank you for listening and joining us at the Umbraco US Festival. Let's check if we've got any time for questions.